right. We can probably get started, right?
Let's do it.
Get this show going. So this is a gathering that we used to do in our office, and now we do in this format. We call it Think and Link Pants Optional, and we get together and we have our two guests have a conversation about design, about our new world order and what's going on. We have a number of wonderful questions for our guests. And then we do a 30-minute breakout and we come back. So it'll be a small group session afterwards. I ask all of you to remain on mute. And we are getting a ding. Is somebody else getting that? Very loud.
I am really sorry.
That's you.
I get a lot of emails and texts, and I'm trying to figure out how to mute them. Maybe in this particular scenario, I apologize.
You do get a lot of.
That's a busy.
That was regular.
Yeah. Oh my God, you have no idea. The volume of email is really. You know what? I'll just turn all this off. Sorry.
Oh, that's no worries. Okay. That's great. Okay.
Great. And Aaron, you mentioned at the top of the hour, I just want to re-mention this for those that are just joining. We'd love to take questions, so please use the chat box. And I'm going to follow those and track those as we go. And we certainly want to get to those questions. So please keep that in mind.
Oh no, it's Slack too. Hold on. Okay, I'm good.
Yeah, so Capsule is a special projects team. We do a lot of design and brand work here in Minneapolis. And it is our pleasure to have all of you here to participate in this. It should be a wonderful discussion, and as we come out of the breakout, we'll send you in with a question. Last week we had, and I want to use this one again because it just lit up, and it's whether or not you're a double spacer or a single spacer when it comes to using type. It came out in a what was it, Smithsonian article about Microsoft switching the standard to single space instead of double space. And I thought I'd bring it up just to have poke a little fun at Kelly because she's still a double spacer. And then it blew up on me. And I found out a whole bunch of people are still double spacers, and literally people are sending me texts afterwards, all double spaced, just to taunt me. And so that'll be one of the questions you'll have to answer, is whether or not you're a double or single spacer. It's a design detail that's important. Anyway, so I guess let's take it away. Any questions, show up in chat. Keep yourself on mute. We love video though. We'll have a conversation. And Kelly, do you want to take it away with the first question? Because I don't have mine open at the moment.
Sure, yes, no problem.
Jump right in.
Again, welcome everybody, and we're excited to have Nic and Christiane here with us today. I just want to start with, you guys are both in New York City, in the epicenter of this health crisis, this pandemic. And we try to focus on the positives that we're seeing, the optimism, looking to the horizon on these, during these conversations. But just would really love your perspective, what you're seeing, again, the positives. We've heard about what people are doing. Christiane just mentioned for the healthcare workers, people are getting up early in the morning and thanking them for their service. What other positive things are you seeing there in the city?
I mean, I think that, the sort of going back to normal of the world, I think is never going to happen. I mean, this is something, I think about this as a line in the sand. And, on the positive side, first of all, I've met all my real neighbors in New York, which is really fascinating, because at 7 o'clock every night, we all open our windows and cheer for the healthcare workers. So I know, now I can see who lives across the street from me, and it's kind of lovely. But I also think that there's this sort of shared humanity, because we're all in this together. And so, the saying of hello to everybody on the street, mask and all, has become part of the protocol. And that to me is pretty phenomenal. Yeah. So, I think that we're just going to see each other as human beings in a totally different way now. In New York, and I think everywhere in the globe for that matter.
Great, thank you.
That's elegant. It's amazing how the closer you get in proximity to people in closer cities that you don't really know them, meet them. And here's this wonderful opportunity to do that.
Meet everyone.
That's
Yeah.
elegant. Yeah.
I think together as a collective community, it also has brought a lot more self-awareness and sort of consideration. You know, in New York, we're so busy running past each other all the time. We never actually stop to look around and see who's next to us. So it's been really nice, you know, even with concerns of germs, there's people sort of holding doors for each other and moving out of the way and just being more self-conscious and self-aware of their own body movement. And then I think even more practically and simply, it's really wonderful to see all of the public spaces being used outdoors. People are forcing themselves outdoors even in the middle of the day. There's obviously some concern over social distancing there, but I think generally this will impact an urban environment in a really significant way, because now the city will think about in the future, how can we, for example, take more cars off the street, promote even more public and pedestrian space, promote more bike lanes to reduce impact on public transit. So I think there's going to be a lot of positive urban planning benefits that come out of this too. A lot of those trends have already existed, but I think they'll just accelerate now, which is probably one of the themes of this talk and many others. Of a lot of this stuff has already been happening.
Right.
This just accelerates a lot of the transformation.
So I think it's interesting though, because you're in Brooklyn, Nick, and I'm in Manhattan, and I think the experience is actually very different.
Yep.
And I think that that's also evidenced by the caseload too, so of COVID. So apparently it's spreading more quickly in Brooklyn because people are not social distancing in the same way that they are in Manhattan. I think it's just a different population density, and you know, things like Prospect Park, which is, you know, right near Nick, people are actually congregating there in ways that they're not necessarily in my neighborhood. So it's really interesting. So I think we'll, you know, it's each neighborhood in New York is nuanced, which I think is probably true, you know, with respect to everything.
Yeah, they've turned the River Parkway here into a walkway. So there are very few cars or any at all on the River Parkway on the Mississippi, and it's amazing. I hope they keep it that way. It's a fascinating move, to your point of accelerating this perspective. I do want to get something on the table and off the table, because and Nick, and your background in architecture at MIT, and then also WeWork, and getting the WeWork conversation. They had issues and challenges before that we're not going to get into and talk about at all. But you talked a little bit about the hub and spoke model when we first met, and this new order in work, and where we work and how we work. I'd be curious if you'd go into that in more detail, because that was really fascinating to me.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I think even if you zoom out before then, it's important to take a moment and just think about things that I think, and again, I'm not the only one that thinks this is widely published now, but I think there's a number of things that'll be sticky, and at least one, if not more, things that won't be sticky coming out of the other side of this pandemic. The things that are sticky, for example, are flexibility, mobility, real estate efficiency. CFOs globally have jumped on this opportunity to reduce costs of real estate. And of course, health and wellness, inclusive of sustainability, given that we've seen pollution reduction, again, globally, significantly decreased. So those are the types of things that are sticky. What I actually don't think is going to be sticky is a very straightforward work from home model. And I don't mean that for everyone, right? I think a lot of the things that you read about are missing the reality of what this highlights. This highlights actually a need for variety of experience, a need for equity among all of the employees. Not everyone is able to work from home to the same level of efficiency or productivity for all kinds of reasons. The whole childcare issue aside, even if you think about the amount or quality of space, the ability to connect to a high quality internet line, so on and so forth. This also highlights a need for a connection. Zoom is really great, but people are anxious to meet at least their close friends and family in person again, and probably their top clients from a work perspective. And it also highlights, by the way, the challenges that companies will have creating a culture among a distributed workforce. Many companies compete and attract and retain talent based on their culture. And it's not just Google and Amazon and others anymore. It's all the not little companies in terms of significance, but smaller companies in terms of number of people are all competing for talent based on amenities and benefits and so on and so forth. So I think what we'll see coming out of this is probably an evolution of a hub, spoke, and home model. It's actually 3 parts. And of course, there's probably little corollaries or something splitting off of each of those 3. But again, we haven't really seen more than, say, a reactionary response to what exists as a hub and spoke model. And what I mean by that is, I think I'm gonna get sick if I see another sort of 6-foot radius diagram of workspaces. And I think you'll see a more fundamental rethinking of the program of hub, spoke, and home, where the hub will be more about large group meeting. It'll be more about amenities. It'll be project-based team collaboration, innovation, and product design. I think for the spoke, you'll actually see the spoke might actually arguably become the most used component of all of that. It'll be closer to home. It'll reduce commute time. That will be the equitable component for those that don't have access to space or higher internet quality at home. It'll be for small group meeting, potentially heads down space. And I think that's where also you'll see a lot of amenities pop up. Adjacencies to healthcare and fitness, adjacencies to childcare, adjacencies to F&B or grocery stores. And then of course the home model, which I'm guessing most of us, if not all of us, are at home right now. And that's just really going to be individual heads down focus space. But I read a really interesting article yesterday from Coinbase saying that in order for all of this to be successful, all of this being a hybrid model of hub, spoke, and home, you actually have to have a remote first mentality. Because if you don't have a remote first mentality, a lot of people will feel guilty and feel like they're forced to go into HQ to connect with their manager or their boss or their team or so on and so forth. So there's going to be a number of operational practices, I think, that go into place to make all of this successful in the back end. But I could go on for this forever, so I'll pause there.
No, that's great. So Nick, you haven't thought about this at all.
No, yeah, it sounds like
I haven't even gone into how I think the real estate industry will change and play out in this, but that'll be for a different question.
Thank you. That's great. Christiane, anything to add to that?
Well, it's interesting because I come at it from, more of the tenant of a WeWork as opposed to thinking about it structurally like that. I have a startup and we had a fairly dispersed workforce to begin with. So, some of our team is in Eastern Europe, some of our team is in South America, and we were in a co-working space. And when the sort of reality of this pandemic hit us, the first thing we did was contact our landlord and say, you know what, we're out, and we're actually moving out today. And the thought is that we will be remote and dispersed for the time being until we really understand sort of structurally what's going to happen in New York. And I think because we had already set up the company that way, so that we were using Slack on a near constant basis with our colleagues all over the world, that the sort of transition out of the office completely was pretty seamless, to be honest. We never had This is a brand new company. So we never had a server room. We never had phone lines. We were just on our laptop and completely mobile. So, we can move out of our space in one afternoon and not disrupt the business at all, because everything's, cloud-based now. So we didn't have any of the sort of infrastructure issues that some of our incumbents probably have. And so, in this new world order, it's really interesting to be super nimble and very, very flexible. And also, listen, we're small. So, I don't know what the future of this is going to look like for us, whether we will never go back into a shared workspace again. Also, because we also have to sort of factor in the New York of this. And it looks like we'll probably be the last people out of shelter in place. So for us, there are so many unknowns that having the flexibility to work remotely is in our favor at this point.
Yeah,
that's great. You have, I should explain a little bit of your background because for the audience to know what you did previous to your current startup with Dwell Studio and selling to Wayfair. And then having just raised funds just recently, right before this pandemic, which was nice timing on your part, to be in a really good place coming into this. You have a definite intensity when it comes to your focus on design, and which is so very impressive about the details that you put into everything you look at and the design. So how do you remain patient during this time period as an entrepreneur? How do you remain calm? Or do you not? And this is the calmest we'll ever see you.
No. I mean, you're talking about an entrepreneur who's lived through 9/11 and then the financial crisis. So I started my first business out of college in 1997, and then went to market in 1999 with Dwell Studio. And I was a kid, and then then 9/11 came our way. And so, we were downtown and we couldn't leave our area. We had to show our ID to get below 14th Street. I mean, so, and then I, as I was telling you, we went through the financial crisis, and I remember having a really expensive trade show booth at the Jacob Javits Center and looking around, and there was no one there. And that was it. I was like, this is over. I mean, so each of these different crises has its own nuance. And listen, this one is it's heartbreaking. Like, people being, sick or passing away is horrible. And so I just try and sit and wait and iterate and pivot and do all the things you need to do in a scenario like this. I want to keep my employees happy and healthy. I want to give back to New York City, which has given me so much. And I want to understand what the new world order is going to be, because, we're looking at something completely new. I mean, in our favor, of course, is the fact that our whole startup is digital. So, we're doing this virtually anyway. So, there's my phone ringing, of course. And, so, I just want to do the right thing in a situation that, has never been navigated through before.
Yeah. It's impressive.
Yeah.
I'd love to jump in and ask both of you these questions. Christiane, I recently read an article that you had authored around creating a healthy space. We're obviously spending a lot more time at home. We're experiencing life in a different way at home. And many of us, even we're seeing this here today on this call, we're glued to our laptops in the same spaces that we typically eat and we sleep. And how do we intentionally, or how can we create or design an environment that helps us transition from work mode, and I think you said, to rest mode at home?
I mean, Nick, you go ahead, because I could talk about this for hours. So I'll let you start.
I'm glad that I got that question last night so I could think about it a little bit. So my answer will be much more simplistic than Christiane's, I'm sure. But to me, again, New York is different from Minneapolis, is different from Columbus or LA or wherever you might be. So I think everyone has different living situations and therefore different ability or capacity to change their environment or to get a lot of variety. So I was thinking more and more about a quote unquote operations mentality where you have to, it's really about how you behave in your mindset. So it's important to, plan and schedule your day. It's important to get up and move, change position. Even if you just rotate from one window to the next or from a wall to a window.
Right.
And also really giving yourself boundaries and not letting yourself overindulge or get caught up in screen time. So setting down the technology in those transitional phases, making sure that you stop to have a conversation throughout the day, assuming you live with someone. If you don't live with someone, that's a little hard, but the face-to-face contact is really important. So I think apart from all the obvious ones in terms of being conscious and aware of your ergonomics, body positioning, and work time versus rest time, lighting, natural light versus artificial light, and the coloration of your screen, so on and so forth. It's really about keeping a schedule and giving yourself boundaries.
That's a great perspective. Thank you. Yes, great answer, Christiane.
So my whole perspective on design has changed completely because I live in New York City. I have zero outdoor space. So when you see shelter in place here, I mean, I'm in an apartment on a near constant basis with children. And what I realized is that sort of how I will think about design from now on is how all of these spaces make me feel. So I think we think about design as sort of functionality and largely aesthetics. And there's the whole idea of how each and every space makes you feel is actually going to shape the way you design and function in those spaces. And so there's a really interesting interior designer, architect in New York. Her name is Carolyn DiCarlo, and she actually, this is her whole sort of genre is thinking about space and how you relate to it. And so, we started to break down the home and, think about your entranceway. If you walk into your space, that is the threshold. And the minute you walk into that space, how it makes you feel is going to inform how you feel in the rest of your space. And you can go back layers. And, she said something interesting to me, like, think about how you would feel if you had a glass coffee table and you threw your keys onto that glass coffee table every time you came into your house. How would that disrupt your feeling around your space? And so if you think about that, it's pretty easy to go into your space and see what makes you feel rested, authentic, fulfilled, and what doesn't. And you can start to remove the things that don't make you feel rested, authentic, healthy, and all those things that are so important now. And I think that what Nick is saying is very right as well. When our spaces are our everything, we have to be very, very, very intentional about transitioning from one function in our space to the next. And so think about the bedroom, for example. Like that is the most important room in our homes because we sleep there. And I think, I was reading some data, we spend 23 years of our lives asleep, right? And then 7 extra years of our lives trying to go to sleep. So when you think about that, I mean, that's a huge chunk of time. And so now that our bedroom has become our boardroom, has become all of these other things for us, we have to be very intentional about, closing our laptop and giving ourselves some transition time between screen and sleep. Because if we don't, that 7 years we spend trying to go to sleep becomes 10. And you think about the functionality of each and every one of these spaces as they become more than one. And so intentionally, to Nick's point, closing your screen and, reading a book, or really thoughtfully transitioning and kind of scheduling your day with your space is going to make you feel a lot better. And it's pretty simple. And that doesn't mean you have to renovate your home. You know, this isn't a flip it. This is just you thinking about each and every activity in the four walls that you have right now. And not only today, but what does it mean for the rest of your life? I mean, I think when I think about what I did before this, you know, falling asleep with my iPhone in my bed, now I'm very thoughtful about that, because I realized that it wasn't doing me any favors.
That's great. No,
Yeah.
absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Sweet question. Yeah.
So before we go into our small groups, I've got a question around stories that you're seeing out there that give you a little hope for the future. Are there things that you're seeing from there, or just anywhere in the world, that give you a little bit of hope for the future broadly or specifically around design? Nick, you want to start us off with that one?
I started the last one, so I was going to let Christiane take that.
You don't want to take that. That's a tough one, I know.
I mean, you know, listen, as somebody who's spent their life thinking about home design, the idea that we're all coming back home, and that it's not just a place where we sleep at night, is really hopeful to me, because it means that we are reprioritizing our time, and we're thinking about our families, ourselves, you know, all of the things that, I mean, this is like, talk about a lesson in self-care. I mean, this is really reprioritizing how we think about how we spend our time. And we all have homes, and they really are, they've always been the center of our universe. And I think we're refinding that. And I think there's a lot of, you know, whether it's, you know, completely optimistic or crazy, but there's so much hope in that. If we can have authentic conversations with not only our families, but ourselves about what it means to be home, I think that the ripple effects in terms of how much time we spend on technology, how much time we spend virtually, how much personal, you know, inventory we give to social media, maybe we'll reprioritize that and actually give it to being home with our families in a real authentic scenario.
Answer.
Yeah,
Nick?
a new connection to home.
Yeah.
I know that sets you up as a really tough answer.
And also,
answer.
what does it mean? Like, what does home mean to everybody?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I would echo a lot of the same things. Only to add that, you know, for years we've been talking about how work and life have bled together, and it's finally been forced to be true upon everyone simultaneously. So I think Christiane points out a lot of the opportunities, which are wonderful, and I think it also creates a few challenges, but it also gives us an opportunity to reevaluate our own priorities and think about everything. So I think on the backside of this, you'll see a lot of just change in the way that people approach their own sort of careers and job search, and try and find a way of bringing their family into that more, rather than having such separate lives. And I think that sort of mentality, compared with flexibility and mobility, will allow people to create wonderful new connections with each other in more meaningful ways that they haven't before. So I think this creates an even stronger community on the backside of it, which to me is really exciting.
Absolutely.
Great.
I hope that these are not just temporary behavioral changes, right? That they stick. Yeah.
That's great.
Aaron, before we get into breakouts, we have a couple of questions that have come in. I'd love to get to those really quickly. Janie had a great question regarding back to the hub spoke home model. And do either of you, both of you, think that this will lead to more people considering a move from big cities, urban areas, to rural or smaller communities?
I mean, I would say yes. And I think that there, you know, as a parent in New York, but also listening to the rest of the community, you know, as people talk about COVID-20 in flu season in February, for example, there isn't a parent in New York who isn't thinking about, wait, what does that mean? Because A, I live in New York City, and B, what does that mean for my child in school, right? I mean, the ramifications of a second wave of this are obviously, you know, are obviously very serious for parents with their kids in school. And so I think there's this incredible, you know, complete nonstop chatter about what does this mean? Like, I have kids in school, my daughter's about to go into high school. Like, what does this mean for her? And do I really seriously need to consider my options as a parent here?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I personally have at least a handful of friends that have already left the city and are in the process of looking for or already purchased property upstate in New York, which is a common practice to have a second home, but they're actually considering it as their first home.
Yeah.
A second home for those, of course, that have the means to. I just listened to an interesting interview the other day. There's a county that's very popular up on the Hudson here, Ulster County. It was a real estate agent being interviewed, and he was saying that there were, by his estimation, anywhere between 5,000 and 6,000 new residents in Ulster County, which doesn't sound like much until he noted that basically the three biggest towns around there before were a sum total of 12 to 15,000. So it was like 35 to 40% growth almost overnight for those. So it's interesting. He got into, for example, questions around the tax base and infrastructure, city infrastructure, fire departments, hospital system, so on and so forth, and how you'll see those bolstered. So I think even though they'll be a little bit stressed now, you'll see improved economies around and outside of metropolitan areas, which is really, I think, really exciting for any number of ways. But of course, it also raises the question of gentrification,
Right.
and equity or equitable workforce, so on and so forth, equal access. And it's the interesting thing is that's also paired with a potential vacuum in metropolitan areas, especially as it relates to commercial real estate. The residential real estate market in New York and LA and San Francisco and even in Seattle was overstressed. So there's artificially elevated rents and certainly mortgages and prices in those areas. So I'm curious to see if it doesn't necessarily balance out and normalize from a residential side, but at least there might be a little bit of a relief valve. On the other hand, commercial real estate has been more or less decimated everywhere, whether it's metropolitan, rural, or whatever, due to the fallout of retail. So I think you'll see a lot of big box malls or retail stores on the outside try and shift to be more lifestyle brands and be places that you go for lifestyle amenities. Again, just to reiterate the importance of things like gyms and childcare centers and climbing walls and, activity based. It'll be more activity based, I think, and experience based than it will be just straight retail. And then commercial real estate in the city, I think, is a really big open-ended question, because no CFO is going to say, I need 50% less density for health and safety of my employees, so I'm just going to rent twice the amount of space. That's not a thing. That won't happen. So I think there's some open-ended questions there about where this goes.
You know what, I'll add to that, Nick. I was on a design call with some of the people in the kind of high-end interior design trade. And they basically said they've seen this gigantic shift in their business. And that is people making their second homes into their, quote unquote, pandemic bunkers. And so what they're thinking about is, you know what, this isn't a weekend home anymore. This is potentially my fallout shelter if I go through something like this again. So to your point, the internet has to be up to Zoom school standards. The second home that may have been a weekend place for the summer now has to work for me all year round. There's a completely different set of considerations. And I may or may not make this second home my first home going forward. And so there's been this complete shift in the kind of discipline of interior design. And people are trying to do this. I mean, obviously, this is a certain sector of the economy, but these people are trying to do this very quickly, and it's just fascinating behavior. And so that's where the interior design market is seeing opportunity right now.
Interesting. Yeah, the fallout bunker of our home is becoming that in our lives is a fascinating perspective on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When they started to say that, I was like, wow, that's A, dystopian, and B, probably true.